Hello, Ned. Do you have my voice?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very thankful of you, Ned, because your interesting and insightful presentation. I have a question that what I understand from this presentation that we have two major conditions for consciousness. One condition is a biological theory that you have point electrochemical process that are maybe is necessary for consciousness but not sufficient. And one condition is integrated information theory that say we should have sufficient level of complexity and integrated information for have consciousness. What I'm trying to ask is if we have these two major conditions for consciousness, that means in biological theory, we have the sufficient level of complexity in biological structures of human brains, and the sufficient level of complexity of integrated informations in human brains. If we have these two major conditions in artificial intelligence systems, can we say that these systems have consciousness, or you think that there are some conditions that we have not explored yet?
Yeah, so there's a lot of controversy over both the biology centric view, like I favor, and the integrated information theory. And I think many people who work on this would say that neither of those are sufficient for consciousness. And so they point to two other factors. One factor is whether there is some kind of higher order monitoring. So that's the view held by Hak-Wan Lau, Axel Clearman, Steve Fleming, Matthias Michel. Quite a few researchers in this area are convinced that higher order monitoring is required and maybe is both necessary and sufficient, and that maybe the integrated information approach is all wrong. The integrated information approach has some very bizarre consequences, as Scott Aronson has shown. And one of those bizarre consequences is you can take a simple error correcting circuit and multiply it repeatedly, and you get a system that is way more conscious than we are. So he showed this, that a replicated error correcting circuit, you could, if you have enough of them, you get a very highly conscious system. And also, as many people have emphasized, very simple systems have some element of consciousness according to integrated information. Really anything that has just a small number of states that are somewhat integrated with each other has some element of consciousness. So those are all very surprising. The other point of view, consciousness without ignition and global broadcasting. So I think overall, most people are willing to consider alternative theories held by other people. They would agree that there are substantial, they're important theories that would disagree with what you're saying. Sorry, is that intelligible? Hello? Anybody there?
Yeah, Ned, I think he was satisfied. I'm going through the
Okay.
questions and seeing, let's see, okay, in the chat box. They actually, looks like they found a Geoffrey Smith's paper, I guess, or maybe another paper. It's maybe published, but okay, someone raised his or her hand. Mohammed Hussein, میکروفون رو دادم. Okay. Mohammed Hussein, yeah? آقای حیدری بنی. You can ask your question.
I see in the chat, Fateme
Yeah.
Raudbari, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, says that some famous philosophers and scientists claim that IIT, integrated information theory, is pseudoscience. Yes, that's what I was alluding to. The reason they say it's pseudoscience, I don't agree with that myself, but I think what is true is it has some bizarre consequences and also is very hard to test because the measure of consciousness, this phi thing, is very hard to compute. Many people have said that you can't really have a good test of it. Now, of course, it is concrete enough so that Scott Aaronson was able to show that just by stringing error-correcting circuits together, you would get something with very high phi. So it has some consequences. They're odd ones.
Yeah.
Another consequence that Aaronson showed that is even more surprising is that the string, that the grid of error-correcting devices doesn't have to be active. That is, it can be entirely quiescent. What counts for the integrated information theory is what it would do if it was activated. So it doesn't actually have to be active.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very odd consequence too, given that the one thing we know about all creatures that have consciousness is that their neurons are very active. Somebody says that they don't have the slides.
No, in the beginning, I had this.
I couldn't hear that, but okay. So
Ned,
I see some other questions here.
Yeah, Ned, do you want to finish your presentation, or do you want to answer the questions?
What?
Do you want a presentation, or do you want to answer the questions?
Well, I'm fine with either one.
What do you say we finish the presentation, go back to the questions? What do you think about that?
What?
What do you think about you finish the presentation and then we go to the questions?
Oh, sure. Okay, I will do that. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's see. So, okay, window. Okay, can you see my slide?
Yeah. We were at fading qualia. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. So this requires a distinction between standard functionalism that says that the mental nature of a state is constituted by its causal relations to inputs, outputs, and other mental states. And my colleague Dave Chalmers' functionalism, which says that the mental nature of a state is nomologically determined by its causal relations to inputs, outputs, and other mental states, where nomological determination is determination according to laws of nature. So what my colleague Dave Chalmers thinks is that in the actual world, the laws of nature are such that functionalism applies, but that there are possible worlds in which functionalism and physicalism generally fail. So it's a weaker view than standard functionalism, which says there are no possible worlds in which functionalism fails. So functionalism of either kind puts pressure on biological theories, since it opens the door to creatures that are functionally like us and arguably mentally like us, but lack the relevant biology. So if functionalism is true, as advocated by that paper I mentioned at the outset about large language models, then the biological theory is probably wrong. So the idea is that, so this is Commander Data, who you may know from Star Trek. So he is mentally like us perhaps, but lacks our biology. So what is the argument? So we're talking about the fading qualia argument. What is that argument? So this is an argument by my colleague Dave Chalmers. And the argument is that if absent qualia are possible, fading qualia are possible. Fading qualia are not possible, so absent qualia are not possible. Absent qualia would be a creature that is functionally like us, but doesn't have any consciousness. So he's saying if you duplicate the functional processing in the actual world, you will duplicate the consciousness. And he's talking about nomological possibility. Okay, so that's the basic line of, that's the argument. So we're agreed that absent qualia are not nomologically possible. Dave Chalmers, we all agree, but for different appeals to human rationality, whereas Peter Godfrey Smith and I appeal to the biology of consciousness. So how does Chalmers' argument work? I suggest to everybody that you read it, or you can read a summary of it in my recent book, which is available for free on the Oxford University Press website, and also on my website. So the idea is we have a brain, which I'm symbolizing by 2 neurons. That's stage 1. Stage 1.1 is you replace 1 neuron by a magical microchip that not only duplicates the electrical activity of the cell, but also its chemical activity. And it does whatever is required to duplicate the neuron. And then you have 1.2. And then stage 2 is you've got silicon replacements of all cell bodies. And then the next stage is you replace everything else by silicon. And you have then a complete silicon replacement. So so you start with conscious Dave. This is Dave Chalmers' example. You end with a zombie robot that looks just like Dave and behaves just like Dave. And then the idea is that in between, you've got this series of replacements. So the argument is meant to be a reductio ad absurdum. There's something supposed to be impossible about this process, and that leads to the conclusion that the zombie robot is not possible. The idea is that this replacement in Joe, we call the intermediate stage Joe, preserves large-scale aspects of neural architecture without the electrochemical or quantum mechanical features of neurons. So now why is this supposed to be impossible? So what is supposed to happen in this period? Well, one possibility is that qualia suddenly disappear. At some stage, the replacement of a single neuron makes Joe a zombie. And as Chalmers, I think, correctly says, this would be an unprecedented, brute discontinuity in laws of nature and counter to everything we know about neuroscience. We can eliminate this option. What about this? That Joe, there will be some stage at which Joe has a weak version of consciousness. Or another version is Joe sees something substantially different from bright red, something less complex. Or Joe loses one modality or loses color vision. But Joe says and judges that he sees bright red. So what Chalmers argues is that these are significantly implausible. And what's mostly implausible is that Joe would have a weak experience or lose a modality, but as far as what he says goes, be just the same as Dave, completely normal. And then there are other people who say it's actually incoherent. This is Ty and Shoemaker say that the description of Joe is incoherent or otherwise conceptually flaws. So what Chalmers says is that the description of Joe conflicts with what we know about nomological possibility. In particular, he says, for a sentient rational being that is suffering from no functional pathology to be so systematically out of touch with its experiences would imply a strong dissociation between consciousness and cognition. We have little reason to believe that consciousness is such an ill-behaved phenomenon and good reason to believe otherwise, unless we are prepared to accept this massive dissociation between consciousness and cognition. The original system must have been conscious after all. And so that's the idea that there is no zombie robot at the end of this process. So here is where I think this argument goes wrong. There are two senses. So the argument is based on the idea that for a sentient rational being that is suffering from no functional pathology cannot be so systemically out of touch. But the question is, what is that functional pathology? So what Chalmers is thinking about is what might be called orthodox functional pathology. Joe's reasoning, inference, and other rational processes, insofar as they affect his behavior, would be impaired, but he claims they're not impaired. He claims that as far as what Joe says and does, it makes rational sense. If he sees something that he is important to his values, he does the right thing. But there's another sense of functional pathology, which is introspective functional pathology. His introspection doesn't work properly. He's losing his sensation, his experience, but his beliefs are just the same as they would have been otherwise. So his beliefs about his own phenomenal states are systematically wrong. And that is a kind of introspective functional pathology. So Chalmers, Ty, and others pick this interpretation, but what about this interpretation? So my argument is that if consciousness really does have an electrochemical nature, the thought experiment is set up so as to create a bizarre relation between that electrochemical nature and cognition, So that very bizarreness cannot be used as an argument against the electrochemical nature of consciousness. And that's the end of the talk.
That's all, folks. Thank you, Ned, so
Yeah.
much. Thank you. Really, you went. First of all, it was so multidisciplinary, and at the same time, and it was like the most recent studies and the philosophical arguments.
Well, the interdisciplinary philosophy of mind is really important. The number of interesting results in neuroscience, biology, and artificial intelligence that are interesting to philosophers is just astonishing. And they cry out for philosophers to be thinking about them.
Yeah.
And it's really important for philosophers to get involved in some of this empirical material. It's really the most popular area of philosophy of mind right now, and really important to understanding not just the mental nature of machines and neural complexes, but also their political and ethical properties. And philosophers really need to get involved in this.
Yeah, thank you, Ned. I personally enjoyed a lot, learned a lot, and I'm going to go through the questions as fast as I can. So Mohammed has asked, what steps do you think we should take to get closer to the final answer? For example, in neuroscience.
Well, I think that people are pursuing neuroscientific theories of neuroscience, the way that neuroscience impinges on all four of those theories. There's a hugely active community of researchers, including a lot of philosophers, and centered around. So, for example, at University College London and the Wellcome Center, there's a group of neuroscientists and also philosophers involved in thinking about the higher order or monitoring approach, centered around Steve Fleming, Nadine Dijkstra, and some other people, and a lot of activity there. There's a weekly consciousness club meeting that some of your listeners may be interested in. Anybody can join, and I would say they have some of the best people showing up at that thing. There's a lot of interest in London, and there's a large group centered around Hak-Wan Lau on higher order thought, with a lot of really interesting stuff going on. There's a lot of really interesting material available that neuroscientists, philosophers are all working on. So I think that there will be many interesting developments in the near future.
Next question is from Mohammed Hussein. Hi, Ned. Thank you for your presentation. I want to know if you think that AI cannot be conscious as in its electrochemical structures.
Well, okay. So my answer to that was in this slide. Let's see. I'll get it up. Let's see if I can. Okay, this slide. Yeah, my answer to that is this slide. I think the evolutionary argument that I gave depends on what electrochemical processing is for. One possibility is it's for some elementary form of consciousness. The other two possibilities are learning and inhibition. If either of these is true, then meat, although necessary for human consciousness, might not be necessary for machine consciousness. If this is true, meat might be necessary, that is, electrochemical processing might be necessary for machine consciousness too. So, my official view is I'm trying not to take a stand on this. I think there are various possibilities. These evolutionary results only came out in the last year. So there's discoveries all the time that are relevant. And I think philosophers really need to keep their eye on scientific developments to see what they suggest.
Yeah. The next question, it's Fatima's, his continuation of the pseudoscience of IAT. So she responded that, so we claim other theories of conscious are pseudoscience because they are also hard to test. And I would like to ask you that what is your view of the letter that was signed that IAT was a pseudoscience, and it had a lot of there was a lot of controversy around it. A lot of famous people, Daniel Dennett signed, I think, signed that that kind of letter. So I want to know what's your view on that letter.
Okay, so those are two different questions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the question that Fatima actually asked was not, what do we think about the letter? What do I think about the letter?
Yeah. I just added that. The second question was
Okay.
my question, kind of. I kind of cheated.
Okay, but I'm going to answer her question first.
Yeah.
So her question is, are other theories of consciousness pseudoscience and hard to test? No, they're not. So Dave Chalmers and I, together with BU Jade He, are running a Templeton World Charities adversarial collaboration with some other researchers, and who are Megan Peters, Rachel Dennison, and Jan Broskamp. And we are testing higher order versus biological theories. And we've done a number of experiments. There will be some papers coming out. And it is not that hard to do tests. Basically, what you want to find is whether there are, so the higher order states and pointers are in prefrontal cortex. So what you want to try to find is whether there's some prefrontal component to to conscious states. So you can look at that prefrontal component. It's much harder to find a prefrontal pointer component than to look for decoding in prefrontal cortex. So, but that's relevant. That is relevant to testing the higher order view. Also, well, I'll stop at that. So no, I don't think these are hard to test. Global workspace is also not hard to test, and tests are going on right now. And we had some results last June that were released, and they show some successes for the global workspace theory, but some challenges. So I think these are genuine. These views are not impossible to test. In fact, we're testing them now. Okay, so moving to the letter. As many people pointed out, the tests of integrated information theory in the first phase of this adversarial collaboration really didn't test anything important to integrated information. They tested auxiliary. Emotion theory is very pseudoscience. I do not think it is a pseudoscience, so I disagree. I did not sign that letter. I think it is hard to test, but that there are identifiable consequences, like the identifiable consequence that Scott Aronson pointed out, that a large collection of error-correcting circuits would be more conscious than we are. That is a real consequence. It's a very implausible consequence. And so I would say it's not a pseudoscience for that reason, although I think there's a lot of truth in the pseudoscience claim. And I would add further that a lot of the popularity of the integrated information theory has to do with the fact that Christoph Koch, who is a leading person in consciousness studies, is an advocate of it. And I think these personal factors do come in. So I did not sign that. I would not sign it. But I think there's some truth in it. but I do not think that integrated information theory is a pseudoscience.
Okay, thank you. We still have questions.
I think just one more. I think one more question because I have to go to lunch before my class.
We have two, so we have
Okay,
two.
okay.
Okay. And آقای فروردین میکروفونتون وصله. آقای فروردین. آقای همزاده. استاد همزاده میکروفون شما رو وصل کردم. شما هم سوال دستتون رو بلند کردید.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we have your voice.
Thank you. As you know, recent research shown that the genetic molecule.
I'm afraid I can't.
قطع وصل میشه. صداتون یکم
I
قطع
can't hear. I can't hear the question.
Oh, okay. I will type it in chat box. So thank you.
Okay. صداتون قطع وصل میشه.
Maybe I should just read the chat question.
The chat, I asked pretty much the chat questions. Maybe. Oh, okay. I'll read it for you. Oh, okay. Oh, we had right now two recent ones. Thank you for the great presentation. I was wondering how would you respond to criticism of the concept involving Davidson hypothetical being swamp man who appears out of nowhere due to rare event in a swamp without any ancestors, yet is similar to us in every other way.
Yeah, I think the swamp man is conscious because it has all the brain processing of a conscious being. This raises the question of so-called externalism about the mind and about consciousness. I think that the fact that the swamp man has no evolutionary history is relevant to the intentional contents of the swamp man, and those who think, like Michael Tai, for example, that consciousness requires those intentional contents, they think the swamp man is not conscious, and that shows that the biological theory is wrong. But I don't hold that. I think the swamp man is conscious.
Okay. Next question. As you know, he typed it down. As you know, some recent researchers have shown that the genetic and molecular structure of some parts of the brain, such as cerebellum, is relevant in creating some conscious states. It is published in Nature journal last November. Assuming DNA is involved, what do you think is the path to a kind of biological AI?
Okay, so I don't know about these results, so I can't really comment on them. I'm sorry. There have been plenty of results that the cerebellum is not very involved in consciousness, so I would be a bit skeptical, but I'd like to read about that.
Yeah. And
okay, so I see there's another one here.
Yeah, we'll put this at the last one. I know you have a class and you have to take lunch, so we'll put this at the last one. Thank you for your great presentation. This is Firuz asking this one. Thank you for your great presentation. I think I missed something in your presentation. You mentioned in the flicker that the oscillations does not affect the performance. Then it's not pivotal to the biology of felt experience. In this task, if this task is right, what about the other oscillations which perturbing them can affect the felt experience and performance? I think I missed something.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's me. I'm the one who didn't properly state what I was trying to say. So, of course, oscillations are very important. Brain, circuits that hum together, work together. The brain circuits communicate via oscillations. Yes, oscillations are extremely important in the brain. So I agree with that, and if you interrupt them, you can create problems. However, the results I presented were about what you might call large-scale oscillations that just make the whole brain resonate with oscillatory signals, and those don't seem to have much to do with it. So I was tailoring my remarks specifically to Godfrey Smith. About the large scale. He thinks there are these large scale oscillations that are fundamental to the unity of consciousness. And I was just giving a single data point in opposition, which is that we can have these large scale operations due to lighting, flickering lights that really don't seem to have much consequence for mentality at all. So, but I wasn't meaning to argue that oscillatory behavior isn't important. There are all kinds of oscillatory things in the brain that are fundamental to the way the brain works. So I'm sorry, that was my fault.
Do you have any time left?
Is there one more?
I think we don't have any more questions. Actually, I wanted to ask a question, but
okay, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So, you mentioned it, but I wanted like more exact. Right now you talk about necessity of electrochemical from evolution type, but what about just the carbon cell, just carbon structures? Can the carbon can we replace it with a silicon, as the robot zombie that we had in Chalmers' argument? Can we replicate that electrochemical signaling with silicon structures, or is the carbon structure a necessity too?
Okay, I would like to know the answer to that question, and if you find out what it is, please let me know. Yeah, I do not know the answer to that. I'd be very interested to find out. So if you find anything relevant on that, please tell me. I want to thank you all
Okay.
for listening.